It's 3 minutes past. Let's get started. Welcome everybody to the October 15th SIG Multicluster call. And on the agenda, we just have, Ryan's adding more. But Arthur, you've got the first two.
Yeah. So the first topic was about potentially synchronizing label on service import. So the reasoning behind that is that, well, people integrating with MCS API could potentially have like some service import selector. And most importantly, now, if we add those labels into the derived service as well, we can solve use case where some controller would have some service selector. So I'm thinking about Prometheus operator, for instance. You have service monitor, I think, with a service selector. So with that, you would be able to, essentially monitor a service from multiple clusters. And I would like to add that into the Cilium MCS API implementation. I am wondering if it's something that should be in the cap too. Because right now it could be something off the chart, of the cap. And yeah, I can add in the cap too if you think that's worth it.
So you're when you say syncing labels, do you mean letting the user set labels on the service export and then having them sync to the service import and then Cilium to the target service, or from the source service itself?
Yeah, this is open point, but I was thinking maybe on the service itself, and then we could add some label, like to mark this is a derived services or something like that. And service import, it would be the same. Or it could be in the service export too, or the merging of service export and the service. And then we try to sync it, like probably it should be an exact match, I guess, or maybe intersection or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but exact match should be a safe bet if we don't want to debate too much. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it. So when you say derived, so you're thinking specifically of the derived service you get at the end. So that's at a Cilium implementation detail. But the MCS API doesn't say that you end up with a service at the end.
Yeah.
And so the service import itself has to be derived. It only exists for that. So what I had in mind was other labels that the user could add. But Jeremy, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think label syncing to the service import probably makes sense. The question is, where do we get those labels? Is it from the service? That seems like in line with what we've done so far. Would it be from the service export? That seems different. I don't know that we have other kind of overriding things. So that part makes sense. Yeah, I agree that the derived service, that's a Cilium implementation detail. Maybe it's a common implementation detail that lots of folks have, but I don't think we want to set any rules on that. Like, by all means, copy the labels from the service import. But yeah, I'm curious what, I don't think we ever really kind of got into label behavior, but it has been a while.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around like what direction are you expecting labels to be copied to and from?
So my initial idea was like Jeremy just said, like to copy it from the service you export, not the service export, the actual service, like other resources that are usually exported, but it could be different, right? And then you try to like have an exact sync of that map everywhere on the service import you create on every clusters.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. That if you have labels on exported services, we would have them on the service import as well. I don't have an issue with that. I do, if we're going to do that though, to me that we're saying that we now sync object meta, or at least more of it, right? So is it just labels? Would it be something we consider annotations as well? Like I've tagged this resource. If we're saying that the tags are something that we want to represent in the multi-cluster space, which makes sense, I think. We should probably support both kinds of both kinds of metadata, I think.
That makes sense. It was actually the label question came up when I wanted to add annotation synchronization.
Okay.
So
Okay.
because in Cilium we have many different annotation that modify the behavior of a service, but that's like very Cilium specific. And from the official one, I only found the topology mode, I think, but this was replaced by my second point actually, which is the traffic distribution. Yeah, it's all linked.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this and I'm seeing two possible paths for labels and annotations to be copied, and I don't know if we should have assumptions or like implicit guarantees or like expectations around either one or both, or more granular, or like we probably need like a short design doc on this maybe, because basically like what I'm saying is if you have a service export that has yeah, I'll start with the simpler one first. You have a service import, and if you have an implementation specific thing, like you're creating a service from that with your controller, I don't think that we really care if a label gets stuck on a service import and your controller that has some implementation specific thing copies it down to the server to like a generated service. That seems fine. It seems like a thing that we shouldn't really have opinions about or like direct controls to enable, because the like implementation detail service is like not part of the spec itself. The thing that I have more of a question about is the behavior of populating anything from service export to the service import resource, because that's spanning across clusters. I don't necessarily know if there is some way that you might want to decorate, label, annotate the service export in its home cluster that is not aligned. Like, wait, I don't want to populate a label over that doesn't make sense or like loses this context, or like, I think that would be awkward if we just automatically assumed anything, any label like from metadata on service export appears on the service import. I think if we want to populate anything through, we should consider something similar to the Gateway API infrastructure stanza, which is basically on your user authored resource, which is the service export. You can say, these are the labels that I want the controller to put on my service import. And then the controller can see that field, read that field, and write them as regular metadata rather than doing some kind of implicit syncing or copying.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. That makes more sense. Like the idea of we should sync labels, absolutely. You should be able to make sure that there are labels set on those ending services. Some labels you don't want to sync at all. They could be kind of destructive. And we will not be able to guess at that.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, maybe it is just like, maybe it's not just labels, maybe it's labels and annotations, but maybe there's like apply metadata field on your service export. But yeah, I think this could use a very short design doc or PR to the KEP to kind of outline thinking, and we can go from there.
I
'cause
will
it's-
drop the design doc from Gateway API into the
Awesome,
meeting
yeah.
notes because we have exactly this functionality. It's
and,
explicit
and
that
strong bias to copying what we've done somewhere else. So precedent
Cool.
is important here.
So Mike, what you are
Mhm.
suggesting is to basically add the new fields into service export, or copying somehow from the labels or annotation from service export somehow?
Yeah, so like for Gateway API, what this looks like is, or like the parallel, I'll use the names for their fields, but you have spec.infrastructure, and then you have spec, and this would live on the service export, and then you have spec.infrastructure.labels, spec.infrastructure.annotations, and whatever you write into those stanzas is what the controller reads from and then writes as meta.label and meta.annotations or whatever. That's what the controller is using to actually label and annotate the service import resource rather than copying it directly from metadata.
Okay,
You're just applying it in the spec of like what I want to appear over there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And yeah, okay, sure, I can write something about that. So you want design doc or PR to the KEP? Can do both, but both works. Okay, I will do PR to the KEP then. No, but we can discuss in the.
Yeah, I think discussing in the PR is fine. We'll probably have a bit longer description for the PR that hopefully has this an explanation of like why we want this functionality. And there is a little bit of weirdness of like you're setting something in the destination cluster. I think that's probably okay, but it's just something to call out in terms of you're letting the exporter start defining labels and annotations that may exist in a different context.
Yeah, I don't know which.
I'm just wondering if there's any kind of concerns like RBAC type things of if you have a different user role able to set a thing that appears somewhere else.
Well,
I think it's okay.
I mean, when I started implementing this without what you were referring just now, but I wanted to have some annotation prefix to whitelists that the administrator can configure, well, at the cluster level, but yeah. Because I think we have something similar. I don't know where in Cilium. Maybe it's Gateway API or Ingress. I don't remember, but something like that that just takes annotation, but with some whitelists, basically.
Yeah, that's very similar to what this would be. It would just be encoding it into like the spec itself of service export.
Yeah, well, yeah. But I mean, if we need to add some kind of protection, I guess it can be that like both URL plus some whitelist potentially. I'm not sure. I will check.
Cool. I think RBAC's okay because we have sameness and because we assume that any given user has the same permissions because the service import's created in the same namespace in the other cluster and RBAC scoped namespace. I think we're okay.
I'm not sure what you are referring to. Like, because here it's annotation. So what are you afraid of exactly? That you have an annotation that does weird stuff?
I'll try to put it in writing in a PR if you get that started.
Okay.
I think that we're okay though.
Okay. So let's go for a PR then. And the second point, and you actually wrote something, was about the traffic distribution field. For those that don't know, now in Kubernetes 1.31, I think, so very recent, there is a traffic distribution field and you can put prefer close. As far as I know, it's the only value that is supported. And supposedly we might want to sync that to service import too. It is the successor of the topology mod and so on. Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to comment on
Yeah,
that.
this is a tricky one, and I was having exactly it's kind of funny. I was having exactly this conversation over the past week with folks internally and talking about like the changes that we're proposing to make to service import and how we do like topology or locality awareness for that, because right now the MCS spec is very broad in that like you have a very coarse-grained control of your producer writes the service export, and then your controller watches it and generates the service import in that other cluster. In the cluster with the imported service, as a consumer of that service, say I have a dependency on an API or whatever, to use that imported service there, or to at least allow traffic to cross that cluster boundary, I'm using the .clusterset.local DNS addressing for it. And that's it. We have no explicit expectations, as far as I'm aware, of how that traffic is weighted or like what has to go to the other cluster versus may go there, or like if it only goes to the other cluster if there's no endpoints locally. Like we're pretty vague about that right now, I think somewhat intentionally in the spec. And part of the difficulty of this is that if we go forward with this and like really kind of lock down the collapse spec and status flat on service import, clarify service import is really, we mean it this time, only ever to be authored by a controller and not by a human user, then you wouldn't have a consumer writing or editing those fields on the service import because it's something that they're not intended to write. So from that perspective, it's the API would not be identical to what's on service. And I don't think that is something that makes sense for a producer to write on the service export. Like, as a producer, I'm saying I'm making my service available to other clusters in the cluster set, but you want the consumer to have that control of like prefer local or even spread to anything off cluster, even though it might be more expensive. Like the person who's exposing the service is not the one who is in the position to write those rules. So you're kind of stuck in that you don't want it on the service export. The place that you want it is a place where we say humans shouldn't be writing spec fields anymore, and there may not even be a spec field to write. So you're kind of left with like, do you do something as a codified annotation or label on the service import, or is this something that we're okay having implementation specific and like implementations can optionally route traffic however they want or have their own ways of doing this? I also don't have a ton of confidence in like the service APIs for this, just because there's been like 3 or 4 iterations of topology awareness, and it seems like every time it's like kind of sort of issues with it and easy to screw up. And right now, if you look at the docs for it, it's like how traffic distribution interacts with topology aware routing and how it interacts with external traffic policy versus internal traffic policy. And you also have the topology aware hit, like it's difficult. So I'll yield to Arthur and then Jeremy. But that's kind of the thoughts that I've had on this. But I'm dealing with this exact problem of this is a thing that we want to be able to configure, and how is the best way to approach that UX.
Yeah, I kind of agree might be a UX problem, but I'm not sure I agree about the producer don't want to export that field somehow, because in the MCS API kit there is like a stanza on a service should be globally consistent, like the behavior should be consistent. So I think it kind of makes sense to also have this behavior also consistent globally. Yeah, that was it basically. So yeah, I'm not sure if it should really be on the service import somehow because of that, but I will let Jeremy react.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think traffic shaping, traffic direction is sort of like a producer side thing you'd want some control over. So I don't like a consumer. I mean, I probably, my default would be to put that for every service, right? I don't know that, like, this is not the kind of thing I would think that you want to make a consumer think about when they're connecting to service. They just want to call a service. Part of the goal of MCS is that this service will respond and I don't have to know where it is or anything about it. And if I also like, now I have to think about my traffic shaping requirements, all of that, I think I wouldn't want to put that on a consumer. So I'd be inclined to bundle it with service. That said, this is new stuff. We are in a moving target world with networking. I really want to get MCS out there. I'd be inclined not to. This feels less core than like the labels part feels like we're missing part of service. But honestly, even that could be a follow up. I think we should really ask ourselves like, can this be an extension we add after we move through the life cycle? Buy us more time to think about it. I worry about the fact that we are trying to sync an API that's effectively a moving target while we try to promote this to GA.
That makes sense to me. I think we totally could do like the label annotation copying as like a V1 beta 2, like after we get to there, because it's purely additive. And yeah, I guess if we want it producer side, rather than trying to add any fields to either resource, like we could specify something about like the exported service, like pulling that configuration from the service that it's exporting. If that seems sensible.
I didn't quite get what you just meant.
So when you have a service export, you're exporting a service that exists at least in that same cluster, same namespace. When you write the service export, if you have traffic distribution configured on the service itself, we might be able to specify something where like it should follow those rules. That's
yeah. Sorry. Get you.
yeah. I don't know. This is just the beginning of a thought of I forgot that was even an option and that would also exist there rather than try to duplicate stuff.
And about we are trying to sync an API that is a moving target. Now, now that it's in beta and that the field is there, I think they would be less inclined to remove it. That would be my guess, but I don't know.
I had thought the same thing about topology-aware hints and topology-aware routing previously too.
But this was the topology mode was an annotation, so they can do whatever they want with it. And but topology key, yes, but I think that's a bit older, right? Like,
oh, I forgot about that one. Yes.
yeah, but it's like 4 or 5 years. I don't know. on top of my head. Yeah. So we don't do anything right now. That was what you wanted to say. So something after beta v1, right?
I'm glad that we're talking about this now. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, don't mean to stop the discussion. We should keep it going for sure. Just push the inclusion out and make it clear that we're not adding to a current milestone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As we discuss. Yeah.
I think this feels okay. I think that we have more options here than I had previously realized. So like, thank you for this discussion, and this definitely helps. And I'll make sure to like, we need to like go through API review and like bring this up and chat with like Tim and Rob, who have done a lot of work on this distribution stuff on service resource itself, to like make sure that this is going to make sense to them. But I think that could be okay. I think we have a path here.
And well, actually, if we had annotation synchronization, it would not be quite the same, but they could still turn a topology mod which do almost the same. So, I mean, it's not blocking user.
It would be on the producer side, which is potentially different,
Yeah.
but as long as we're explaining the roles, then like what Jeremy was saying about like that being a thing that a consumer, we don't think that they want to think about, like, yeah, I want to get more eyes and ears on this, but I think that could make sense.
Yeah,
Steven?
it feels to me like this would be something that a topology aware MCS controller could do, and so maybe that would have some other source of information telling it what the local, what the consuming cluster's preferences are, and so then it could write it itself in the service imports if that's the place where it ends up, or if it's managing the connections to the remote services, it could do it in some completely different way. In previous discussions, if I remember correctly, we sort of felt that topology was orthogonal really to MCS, to the MCS API, because the zone boundaries tend not to match with, well, they don't match with clusters. Otherwise, there isn't really much point to them. And so you need something bigger. And we'd started discussing it with SIG network at one point.
I remember being part of a discussion at some point where it was like, can we add region to...
Yeah, to topologies.
Yeah, yeah.
And back then, if I remember correctly, there wasn't much interest in expanding topology further. That might have changed now since multicluster is more common, but
well, with this new traffic distribution, I think their standard is more to be like extremely vague, and that the implementation should do stuff.
Yeah. That's kind of what I took away from that, is that it's trying to put less control in the hands of the users, because it's so easy to like screw up the configuration in a way that is not easily understandable what you're doing and the kind of implications of it.
Yeah.
I think we're in a good shape. Thank you very much for raising this question.
No worries.
Yeah,
thanks for the discussion.
Yeah. So just to make sure we're all is actually consensus. What I wrote in the minutes is consensus is to postpone after V1 beta 1, but continue discussing in the meantime.
That's good to me.
All right. So next one up is Ryan.
Yeah, just a quick update. So I think last time we discussed the KEP, I forget who suggested we talk to the SIG auth. So I actually went there and talked to SIG auth people, and the conclusion, the high level suggestion was we remove the secret from the application, the cloud profile, because basically the SIG auth chair doesn't like anything that it get persisted, that it get leaked, and after that is basically this. Even if you rotate that secret, it's not enough, because if you had once you are admin, you are always admin. You can leave the back door, everything. Anyway, the short answer is no. So now we brainstormed a little bit. So I'm thinking putting going back to like a square zero and going back to the drawing boards, trying to see the high level idea is this one would only have basically the principal ID, whatever you call it, in a I don't know how to mention. It's kind of like a unique identity. That's it. No credential part, just the unique identity part, and have an audience field. Basically, say who can talk to whom. That's it. And then there needs to be another way for the user to get the real like secret. In order for that to happen, it's a little bit I haven't thought through the whole process. Yeah, I think Mike has the hand up the first.
No, I'm sorry to interject, but going back to the beginning of I guess you're kind of saying we're abandoning at least most of the idea of having this having storing the credential, and I also went to David Eads, who's the API machine erasure on this PR as well. He also agreed. The way we have it currently in the PR, it's not recommended. So it seems like the API machine erasure and the SIG off, you know, in their own independent conclusion. I mean, they came to the same conclusion independently. So I guess it is it is definitely we should revisit and see if we can come up with a better solution. Sorry, Ryan.
Quentin has your hand up.
Sure. I mean, yeah. So it sounds like we could abandon the PR, but is the only alternative workload identity? I mean, federated workload identity between clusters at this point. So whatever credentials you have available to you on the hub cluster management cluster, you would be able to use on the workload clusters directly when you call into them, right?
I think we didn't get into the implementation details. It's more like the API, whether we use the workload identity or something else. Because if it is not on a cloud provider, if I'm not sure any like workload identity would work. If in a normal,
They would have to set up OIDC somewhere on their own.
they could. So the idea was, this is API. So the implementation, I can put it this way, right? The easiest implementation is I create a service account on the cluster and take out the token, and then go to the other go on the leaf cluster, create a service account, grab that token out, and then insert that into hub clusters somewhere into the consumer, or whatever you call consumer application. Because one thing, there's dilemma here is Argo CDQ and a bunch of other open source projects that do touch multi-cluster, they all have this secret somewhere. That's the way they use. It's still, you name it, pretty much they all have this way of need some credentials somewhere. So we need to somehow bridge that gap. So we cannot assume the implementation. We can only, from the API standpoint, find a way to kind of make the story, make the flow work both on-prem or on open source and on. I know on all the cloud providers, at least 3 of them, we are covered. We all have this because we haven't. All the cloud provider has a like centralized CA type of OICD, whatever you call it, right? You can talk to that guy to get all the credentials. but we cannot assume this will always have this one. So the API and the cap, I think it needs to cover like kind of both ways and not get into like implementation details.
But
That's
I'm
where
confused what they recommend. Like you're saying we could get a token and write it as secret and all that, and then I'm
that's
not
not on the
what
API
they're
though.
thinking about. You know, it's like are we just saying the API should not mention the secret, but the consumer should anyway use the secret, but we just don't have it in the API? It seems, you know what I mean? It's like
Exactly.
it's like
weird,
what's
right?
that's not how I read their interpretation, but maybe it's like
so yeah, exactly. So the let me finish what I described before, right? So no. So the API doesn't have the secret because we cannot store secrets in our API. That is not a safe practice. That part I think, as Mike said, both chairs has agreed, and we also kind of know that, but we're trying to fit to the OSS part. So in this case, the story could be you only give us the service account name and the audience. Then we create a service account of that name and grab the token. So that's the implementation detail. So we could say create a controller for Argo CD, create a controller for a queue, and then that controller would grab that token and then insert it into where it should be, and also massage it because queue and everybody has a little bit different format, so we have to massage it and then put it into their desired location. But that one is not part of our APIs, not part of API, right? The API doesn't refer to any secret that we store somewhere. So something like that. And in the cloud provider case, it probably the controller would just go talk to OICD, whatever your centralized part, and then but same thing. We still need to create that thing and then dump that into that where the consumer likes. But in the future, if we get to in the future, like our talk, right? The one inventory rule them all, then they all submit to this rule. Then they shouldn't do this anymore. They should actually talk to the authorized. They should talk to some kind of API server. I had the SIG chair mentioned that we could create a service token and then just there's a service token / token API on the Kubernetes side. You can just get a token, and somehow we did a job to authorize that token on the Leaf cluster, and that would work. I haven't haven't thought through the entire process. Mike, you have your hand up for a long time. Yeah, sorry.
No, I was just echoing what David E suggested. He was also saying something similar to what you're saying. Essentially, the cluster profile will either have no API changes or minimal API changes. Whatever the credential is, refer back to the cluster profile either through labels or something. So the management of the credential is done like either through a controller or something else, and then refer to the cluster profile that is associated with. So it's a little bit the inverse relationship that you mentioned, and he mentioned that he'll try to draft a proper response. So maybe don't close the PR right away and let him see if he see if it gives him a little motivation to write something.
So two things. Yeah, two things. One is I'm not abandoning that PR. Just we'll need to I need to update that. Another thing is I think Corentin mentioned that multiple times, and we discussed that multiple times. Is we are missing one part. Is how do I generate that credential, or what type of RBAC we need? We missed that part. So there's no now if the cluster profile is not the center of this cred story, then that API becomes more important because now the story is really kind of broke. Initially, we were saying that okay, somehow magically, without that API, magically something happens so that you at least can integrate with this cluster profile API because we put the secret there, we put the cred there. But now without this on the API, this API is not part of the cluster profile API is less useful in terms of integration, then we do need another sister brother API. Let's say, hey, I need to create a basic create a token, create a whatever bear token or credential on this leaf cluster for me with blah 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 what's that called? Access controls, right? I need to access this read write all these, create one for me, and then that API could be the one that help getting the creds there. Or again, implementation there, we're not going to put that secret, but somewhere in the reply, or make this one as a it probably overkill. Make this an aggregated API so that actually is a response instead of a CR that you persist somewhere. That's one of the suggestions from the SIG chair, but that kind of it's a long way. We haven't defined any of these yet. That's at least some one of the thoughts from the author of the chair. But we all know that from beginning we missed that part. Maybe it's time to start to think about that part, because initially, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the RBAC, I mean, I look at it from workload identity is available, so that's why I've always been like the credentials maybe not as hard to get. You just need the endpoint in the cluster profile, and I got working examples of that actually. The RBAC one, that was a tricky question, is like, because that gives you a lot of power as soon as you can get RBAC in the workload clusters. It's quite a powerful one. I think what we could do is define what the API kind of looks like, but not provide an implementation. And I'm not sure it's a CR. I think I agree with that, because would you trust putting the same CRs for your permission for all the other clusters on the same? Is like, it sounds like there's potentially risk, because that would mean you have a cluster admin that's able to read those CRs on that cluster or something like that. It's kind of odd. So maybe we can leave it to the user to figure out what kind of security works for them. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's like, for a cloud provider, you would want to host that maybe in the cloud directly and not on the cluster, or maybe have an extra cluster just for that. I don't know. It gets costly. It definitely gets costly. So, but there is an API which I've been calling registration, where you'd say, hey, this is my principal. So that would be my service account or my principal that I'm going to use, or give me one, which kind of ties back into the credentials extension that we could do. And then it's like, in every cluster that's going to come up, this is the kind of permission I will need. And that's the dangerous part, because that grants you a lot. I mean, you get to decide that whoever would do this registration would need to be a cluster admin everywhere, basically, because they're delegating the ability to create permissions everywhere. So maybe that's what we need to define. It's not that much more complicated. Like, yeah, give me a principal, and here's the kind of RBAC rule definition that I need. But yeah.
High level is that's it, right? Basically, give me the principal. I create one for you, or you give me the principal you want, and tell me what the RBACs you need, and then we are going to create that for you, and then send back, not persistent way, but somehow send back, or find a way for you to get that secrets, and then you can use it in your whatever way you want. But if you want to persist it, that we strongly advice against that. But if you really want to persist the way all the open source one does, that we at least have a way for it to work.
Yeah, I had some slides about this whole flow, I think, like a few months back.
Yeah.
I'm happy to share them again if you guys are interested.
Yeah, it sounds like we might need to open that can of worms.
Yeah.
At that time, I was like, maybe we deal with our current. We have a bigger fish to fry. We deal with our current problem first, but now the current problem becomes that problem. So yeah, seems like it would be great if we have that story. Then we have this we had this full circle. The flow would be much better with both APIs there. That's kind of the thought. Yeah. Yeah, just an update because I don't have the result yet. Or probably will take a little bit more discussions offline.
Cool.
Cool. That's it for me.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. And that's the end of the agenda. So if no one else has anything to discuss or bring up, we can call it a day. And oh, well, actually, there's one point I noticed. There's a SIG Multicluster call scheduled during KubeCon. It's probably safe to cancel it. Right, so I'll do that.
We should do a roll call of who's going to be there. It'd be a good time to meet.
Yeah, it would. Yeah. Well, there'll be the, I can't remember what day it is. I think it's on the Wednesday. The SIG Multicluster deep dive and intro. So
I also want to
guess-
do a SIG Multicluster, a beer in hand. That would be good.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. We should figure out an evening where we can all meet up. Well, those of us that are there.
That'd be good. I'll be there. I don't know who other is gonna be joining.
Yeah, I'll be there as well.
Cool.
Same.
Anyone else? Ryan, Arthur, Mike. Oh,
Maybe EU, but not US. Sorry.
okay.
Oh,
Okay.
oh, so
Maybe.
you're talking about sorry, are you talking about offline meeting at the
KubeCon.
site?
Yeah, just a social.
Yep.
Oh yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right. Okay. Well, we can try and organize something.
That'd be cool.
And
Yeah.
see everybody online as usual in 2 weeks' time.
Cool.
Have a good rest of the day.
Take care, y'all.
Bye.
See ya.
Thank you. Thank you.